Hi, I'm Doug Draper with Acme Distribution and the Denver Transportation Club, and I am pleased to present our 10-episode series, Supply Chain and Logistics, The Storytellers. The series is brought to you by CAP Logistics. CAP is experts offering you customized transportation solutions for every need. So please visit caplogistics.com today. So talking about storytellers, excuse me, we have a great story today, and Will Metcalf with OmniTrax is here today. Will, thanks for coming out. Really appreciate it. Good morning. So it's going to be a busy episode. I think it's going to go by quick with great conversation. So before we get started, let's kind of set the stage. Tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about OmniTrax, and kind of how you got into the rail industry. That'd be a good start.
Okay. So I am a Vice President of Business Development at OmniTrax, and with that title, I cover business development, sales, and marketing for most of our railroads west of the Mississippi, with a small sales team. And I've also, in my 10 or so years, well, 10 plus now, at the company, I've also had a more of a new business focus just on new industries, locating new industries on our line, which we call industrial development.
Okay.
So those two areas have been my focus over that period of time.
Great.
Before that, commercial real estate background.
Interesting.
So
yeah.
Too long of a story to go into as to how I found my way into railroading, but I'm here.
That's great. That's great. So tell us about OmniTrax.
So OmniTrax is one of the largest short-line regional railroad holding companies in North America.
Okay.
We have 20 properties and a bunch of other transportation-related businesses within the company.
That's great. That's great. So we're going to step back and really just get a base, what I would call Railroad 101. I think when you and I were talking, it was, I've been working on the railroad, and we figured we'd just start. So maybe kind of like Railroad 101, brief history, kind of how it got evolved and kind of where it is today. So just kind of keep it real simple for our audience to kind of get a good base. So give us your thoughts.
Yeah. The industry is made up of a number of different railroads, railroad holding companies, and the larger railroads, and they're kind of categorized through the regulatory body in Washington, the Surface Transportation Board.
Okay.
They categorize by just size of revenue the different groups of companies, and they refer to the big railroads as the Class 1, so I'll probably refer to that a couple times today as we're having our discussion. The Class 1s in the U.S., there are 5. Out west here, we have Burlington Northern Santa Fe, Union Pacific. East Coast, we have CSX, Norfolk Southern, and then Kansas City Southern has routing mainly through the Midwest, kind of north to south and into Mexico. They have a strong franchise in Mexico, and there are 2 railroads in Mexico and 2 Canadian railroads. And that's essentially North America, the big railroads in North America, and then a part of the industry where OmniTrax operates is short-line regional railroads, and there are roughly 500 of those.
Wow.
It's a substantial part of the overall industry in that about 20% of the carloads originate or terminate on short lines, and then what we do is we feed that traffic up onto the Class 1 network, and they take it from there. Or if they're delivering to us, they'll interchange with us, and we'll deliver to a customer. And that's an overview.
Nice. So 5 Class 1s, and you said there's 500 short lines?
Roughly.
Gotcha. Is that based on as the number of track that you manage, or is it simply based on revenue that defines those different categories?
Between Class 1 and regional short line, it's categorized by the STB by revenue.
Gotcha. Is there anything below the short lines, or is that pretty much it, the class 1s and the short lines?
Basically those 2 categories.
Gotcha. So would it be kind of like maybe thinking of street traffic, right? You got the highway, which would be...
Exactly. I love that. Keep going.
No, I was about to say the highway is the Class 1s, and then the side streets to get to your home, you get off on the exit, and you make the... that's kind of how I've thought of the difference between the two. Is that a good analogy?
It's perfect. I'm thinking about recruiting you to work in my sales team.
Well, I'll tell you what. Sometimes you just gotta dumb it down a little bit. That's what I'm good at. So that's terrific.
Perfect analogy that we use all the time.
Yeah. So let's talk about the class ones and the connectors, because you geographically defined where they are. Out west is the BN and the UP and the CSX. So what are the connecting cities, right? So if you have a short line, you got a highway, and you're going from the East Coast to the West Coast, and you haven't got to your your side street yet, which may be in California. What are the connectors, and how does it go from the CSX to the BN? Like, where does that happen?
All over the place, where the class ones would connect with one another. It's typically going to be in a major market. Those railroads have built to a big city, or they built to a point, and a big city was created 100 years, over 100. Well over 100 years ago.
Right.
So it's just rail yards. It'll be where one rail carrier and another rail carrier, typically in a large city, have sometimes a shared rail yard, and we'll call that an interchange, and the traffic will move from one to the other.
Gotcha. But there's no transloading going on. So if it's a CSX car that picks up on the East Coast and it goes to, say, Chicago for the transfer, there's no transload. They're just giving that box car or whatever type of...
Yeah, they'll what they might transfer over, and it's not all of the time, they'll switch over the locomotives. So CSX might take their locomotives off, and the Western carrier, BN or UP, would likely put their locomotives on. But sometimes they're run through power being locomotives, run through power agreements, all kinds of shared asset agreements. But typically, the rail cars will either be privately owned by the shipper, or they'll be owned by the railroad.
Gotcha. So
so they'll always travel the whole distance, is what I think you're getting at, rather than transloading from equipment rail car to another rail car.
Right.
That would be. That would create some inefficiency, and the industry's done a great job over the years evolving and towards driving for more efficiency.
Right. So it's really the power that changes, not necessarily the car. And there
Most
would be
of the time.
Essentially a pool of, let's say, box cars out there and everything else. So that's pretty interesting. So in some of my experience, I've heard the term of a renaissance, so to speak, in the rail industry, and with so many regulations with over-the-road drivers and hours of service and driver shortages. Sometimes the easy answer is put it on the rail, but I think everybody's doing that, and I think there could be some benefit with the rail. So the renaissance concept of it, if somebody would say there's a renaissance, talk to us about kind of what that would mean from your perspective.
I think we hear that term from time to time when we talk about rail. I think there have been a number of renaissance over the years, but the one that I think is most current and significant, the biggest one in recent years, is probably in the mid-'80s when the industry went through a major deregulation. I think it's a great story in capitalism and the success of our free markets. When they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. So the industry was heavily regulated for many years, and all of the big railroads were struggling, and most of them went through bankruptcies or were about to go through bankruptcies. When they deregulated in the mid-'80s with the Staggers Act, the railroads were, as the rail industry was freed up to do a number of different things, as you would in a free market model. And what they did is they spun off a lot of branch lines that weren't profitable, and that created a big increase in the number of short lines. The large railroads, class ones, focused on what they did well, and that was, hooking and hauling freight in large trains, 100-plus car trains,
Right.
moving at, long distance at high speeds.
Right.
And then the shoreline operators focused on that last mile of service, and the industry's been thriving ever since, to the point now where Warren Buffett's, I believe it's still his biggest deal ever, was bringing a large part of one of the last big piece of the Western carrier that he didn't own all of in-house into Berkshire Hathaway. So I think that's a big, that says a lot about the health of the industry and probably the future of the industry, where it's going. But now it's a very healthy industry, where and from the shipper side, this is important. The railroads were freed up to run their business the way they needed to, reinvesting in their infrastructure, their main lines, to become more efficient and ultimately more profitable. But at the same time, on the shipper side, it's been studied by, studied in Washington and independent studies, real effective rates for the shippers have gone down, inflation adjusted. So everyone wins when in a scenario like that, I believe.
Yeah, free economy keeps it going. So when they did the deregulation in the 80s, that's whenever the short lines really grew, because the Class A's were like, hey, we don't want to drive on the side streets anymore. And is that kind of whenever the 500 short lines really exploded?
Yeah, and I don't know exactly what the numbers are, but I believe it was, several hundred short lines were created during that period of time.
Gotcha. That's good. So we talked a little bit about deregulation, so I'm assuming that there's still some regulations involved in the rail industry. So is there one or two kind of really key regulatory either bodies that are out there, or regulations that really control the flow of the rail industry now?
I think that the biggest, as I see it, the biggest regulatory concern out of Washington is around safety. The industry is always focused on safety. It's typically talked about as the number one initiative by any railroad that you might speak with, because when bad things happen in the rail industry, they can be really bad.
Yeah.
But even still, the folks in Washington are going to look after public interests, and so one of the big regulations recently was positive train control, and that's technology to control locomotives in areas where there's shared, where freight and passenger are sharing territory.
Okay.
So if there are passengers would be passengers on a freight line, passenger rail on a freight line, and obviously safety becomes much more important in those cases. So after a few accidents, or not a few, really, one notable incident, regulation came out to put a lot, billions of dollars of investment to try to minimize those types of incidents. So that and then there's other regulation around rates and pricing, but only under extreme circumstances, I'll say.
Right. Is the just curiosity, passenger and commercial, is there somebody that takes priority? So there's one railroad track, and there's, say, Amtrak, some passengers trying to go up to Winter Park or on the ski train, and then there's a train full of coal. Is there anybody that takes priority over that, or does
most of those
commercial only go during certain times of the day? And
most of those corridors are going to be privately owned by the railroads, and by the way, that's typically it. The rail industry is the largest land owner in the U.S., second to the federal government, so the largest private landowner collectively. So, that's a private corridor, and the railroads own it and control it, but have worked with different entities over the year to create windows and blocks of time being the window
Right.
where passenger can will be dispatched.
Right.
So I'm not sure how I would say that's prioritized, but
Maybe organized.
Yeah,
It's a dance, and they got to make sure everybody's on that. So we were talking right before the show, and your background is definitely real estate. The comment that I was very surprised at that you just mentioned about the rail industry being the second largest landholder. So talk a little bit about that. And I guess when I'm looking at the railroad, I'm like, okay, there's the rail line. Maybe they own 10 feet on either side of the rail, or what. So talk a little bit more about when you say landowner. Is that just the land that the rail is on? Is it surrounding?
Yeah, I mean, a rail corridor, on average, I believe is going to be in the range of 100 feet wide, but it can vary quite a bit. I mean, where the Class 1 networks are from city to city in a lot of places where they have a lot of volume of double main lines,
Yeah.
and I believe that'll be over a wider corridor than a 100-foot corridor. I mean, if the short line industry, our average corridor is probably 100 feet. So, but it ranges, and then there are a number of other real estate holdings outside of the corridor that the industry will own. Depots, rail yards, and quite a bit more than that.
Right. Is the real estate piece kind of free market as well, in the sense that I'm a private company and I want to buy some land next to the rail line for some reason? Is it regulated that, hey, you can only sell that for X dollars a square foot, or you being the land owner, the railroad, can you basically sell the real estate for whatever market value is, or how would that work? That question makes sense. I kind of
I think I'm following it
Yeah.
for the most part, so I'll try to answer it.
Yeah.
See how we do. So probably two likely scenarios there. The railroad owns land contiguous to its right of way that might be available for a potential rail user. I think that's what
Correct,
the
yeah.
scenario would be here. So the railroad could lease it or sell it, and would certainly have the opportunity to do that at market price and we all know what establishes market price. So
Sure.
if I'm willing to charge you less because I like you, and you're willing to pay less, then we've just established market pricing. But anyway,
Right.
I didn't want to do the above market scenario.
Yeah.
But or if it's independently owned, third party owned, then that would be a normal real estate transaction.
Gotcha. Very interesting. So let's shift the conversation a little bit to Colorado specifically, right? All of our listeners are mostly from the Front Range. Talk to us a little bit about some maybe real estate developments related to the rail here in Colorado. I know there's one up in Windsor. I think OmniTrax may be part of that. I may be wrong, but talk about how some of these rail parks are developed and what are specifically going on in Colorado.
Yeah, so in Colorado, our company, OmniTrax, owns, operates the Great Western Railway of Northern Colorado. It is a great property that we've been able to grow with a lot of success for a number of years, decades.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually the first railroad in the portfolio, and it's an interesting story, but probably not enough time for that here today. But so it's a great property. It's in our backyard, so that allows us to focus on it. It connects every major town of northern Colorado on the south side, from Longmont all the way up to Greeley and Loveland and Fort Collins, with Windsor, as you mentioned, in between. And our parent company, our holding company, which is a private equity group, has a very large national real estate portfolio of millions of square feet. So we believe that we've gained an excellent reputation in the rail industry for being very good at locating new customers on our railroads, and we think that comes out of that real estate practice that we have where real estate and transportation intersect. We're able to bring our real estate expertise to bear on a project to add value to a potential rail customer and help them find a location, build out a location, do a build-to-suit, make the rail build out, putting a switch in and all the other infrastructure cost effective, help them finance it and all those things. So and develop a service plan on the rail side that meets their need. I mean, one of the benefits of locating on a short line and with 20%, as I touched on, of the carloads originating or terminating on short lines, that's a significant amount when you look at the overall carload mix of the Class 1s. So a lot of customers have a real preference to locate on a short line because the focus is on service. We can customize service if you need 3 switches a week or 5 switches or 7-day service. We can fine tune the operating plan to be able to meet those needs and all kinds of other things that we can adjust to meet the needs of a customer. And then the industrial development specs on a short line are a lot I'll say more cost effective than on a Class 1. Where on a Class 1, just the infrastructure requirements are going to be much, much greater. The cost of a switch on a Class 1 main line, maybe a power switch that would be millions of dollars, or let's just say 7 figures, versus on a short line, a much, much lower number. So your investment is a lot less, and the Class 1s do amazing things that the short line industry cannot do, hooking and hauling that freight long distances. So we have great synergies with our Class 1 partners where they do that well, and the short lines typically focus on providing that service in the last mile. So back to Colorado, we have had a lot of success, as I said, bringing new industries to that railroad. And we've developed as part of that a 2,000-acre industrial park in Windsor, the Great Western Industrial Park, and we've located many, many large and small industries in that park.
Huh. So if you want to engage with the rail, it sounds like the best way to do that is with a short line, just because of the flexibility and things in working. So that's.
We think there's value in it.
Oh, I can see for sure. My company does quite a bit of rail services, and it's working with the Class A's or Class 1s can be challenging at times. You're just kind of a number on a screen, and it is what it is. So working with the short lines, I could see the value in that. So let's talk a little bit about kind of the future of rail, right? What do you see? We kind of got a little bit backstory. We kind of understand the difference between the short line and the Class 1s. What do you see happening in the next 10, 20 years related to rail, and maybe specifically to Colorado?
Thinking about the future of any industry or anything is always fun, and I'm not sure I have all the right answers on that, but certainly some ideas. Doug, if I had it. Thought I really had it figured out, I'd be sitting in front of a computer right now trading stocks or something. Yeah. But I think that the future of the industry is bright. I think, as I said, with guys like Warren Buffett and other bright people making large investments and having ownership in the industry, a lot of people think that the future will be bright. I think that there'll be a lot of new commodities over the shale revolution. We saw a lot of new commodities that became large, important commodities for the rail industry, like frac sand, crude by rail. During renewable energy initiatives, wind became a large commodity, wind components, because they're large and bulky and they move well on rail. So I think that what'll be interesting, there'll be commodities that probably you or I might not even know about that will need to move by rail. And I think that as the planet becomes more populated, the value of those rail corridors, the real estate ownership, will continue to increase. So whether it's fiber optic lines or pipelines or that are looking for corridors like that,
Right.
or hyperloops. You know, the sky's the limit.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you got the real estate, and you know, maybe commodities that you and I never thought would have a relationship or a connection with the rail industry. So, you know, this segment always goes by so fast, and really appreciate you coming in. I'm sure we'll have to do some follow-up. The rail is very dynamic transportation mode. So, thank you so much for coming today. It was great to meet you and learn a little bit more about the rail system.
Thank you, Doug.
Awesome. And thank you for joining us today at Connect and Collaborate Network. Again, this is the Supply Chain Logistics, the Storytellers, brought to you by Cap Logistics. Thanks.